Start on. Hey guys, my name is Brett, this is Ian, this is Layton, and what we're talking about today is poetry in its many forms. Now you may have noticed we kind of have a color coordination going on here, and we'll go into that in just a minute. So when we all got together and had to think of an idea of what we were going to do, we realized, okay, I'm in writing, they're both in music, he's in music composition, he's in performing, what does that all have in common? And it clicked to us, poetry, because it's a good combination of writing, composition, and performance all together in one. So I'm gonna start it off real easy with the definition of poetry. By Merriam-Webster's definition of it, it's writing that formulates a concentrated, imaginative awareness of experience in language chosen and arranged to create a specific emotional response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. That's complicated, but what it basically just means is that it's intentional writing used to elicit an emotional response.
So I would bet money that every single person in this room has experienced poetry in one way or another. I think it is nigh impossible that you would not have heard, read, listened to any form of poetry because of the many, many different ways that you can experience it through. Firstly, you could have read a poem in any sort of academia, or maybe through just personal readings on your own time, or even through music. If you think about the definition of poetry, it's very broad, and music can fall under that definition.
And yes, as Ian said, that's fine. Poetry is very broad, right? We learn about it in our literature classes. You know, we learn about the great poets such as Poe, or Dickinson, or Frost, right? And we learn how to analyze it, learn how, like, ways to read it. But there really is no specified or right way to write or read poetry, right? Poetry is subject to the poet, just as art is subject to the artist, just as life is subject to the living.
So, writing poetry, when it comes to that, poetry is a lot more than just writing in a rhyme, you know, boil, boil, toil and trouble, which is one I have written down there. That's more about like the rhythms and the meters of it. It has a lot to do with just writing to elicit an emotional response. Just like all art, and like I was saying in my last speech, poetry is what you make of it. You know, your feelings and your emotions behind the poems do a lot to influence how you feel behind each and every poem you write. But you got to keep in mind that every story has its tone and its themes. If you can understand those, then you can elicit a much better and much more realistic response to what you're talking about. And then you got stuff like the pentameter, which is the stressing and the de-stressing of your syllables. A famous example of this is Japanese haikus, which use 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. You've all probably had to write one before. And you have the rhythms and the meters. This is what adds that musical touch and adds that kind of bum ba bum ba bum aspect of rhythms of poetry. So, you may have noticed we've left out Shakespeare. Everyone knows Shakespeare, everyone's had to read one of his poems. And since we decided we're keeping this American theme going on, we decided to talk about 2 famous American poets. Henry David Thoreau on the left and Robert Frost on the right. Now, they may not have a lot in common, both born at completely different times, but a lot of things they do have in common. You may have had to read some of their works before. The Road Not Taken in Walden, I've had to read in high school. I don't know if y'all had to read some of those, but I remember those because they have their own styles, but they have very similar themes. A lot involving around individuality, love of nature, love of the individual, and there's a lot of those American aspects that you find in our poetry you don't find anywhere else. And I decided to give them a shout out because of that. And so how the national anthem was written, this is where the American theme comes in again. The national anthem is probably the great example of poetry in its many forms. There's composition of the poem, there was the writing of the poem, and then there was a performance of the poem. All have their own different meaning behind it. First, it was written by Francis Scott Key in the defense of Fort McHenry. That was the name of the poem when it was written during that time. We gotta keep in mind that the America of 1812, when this poem was written, was under constant threat. You had Native Americans under Tecumseh on the west, you had Canada in the north, and you had the British on the coast. And even during that time, I think the White House burned down during that. Everyone knows that famous painting. So during this time, they needed something to unite America together during this tough time, and the defense of Fort McHenry was an inspirational poem that lifted up Americans out of their despair into surviving the war, and it's what embodies the determination of America's survival, strength, and unity facing challenge.
So, how many of you listen to music? I thought so. Remember when I said that poetry can be experienced through many, many different ways? Music is one of those ways, believe it or not. Many songs, if you are looking at the lyrics, they are structured in a way you would see any poem. They are very short in their rows, but they have many columns. There's a rhythm to it. It's everything that a poem is. It just has musical components to it. And it can even go both ways. You could take a famous song, and if you are just reading it out to everyone, you're reading a poem. And poetry can also very much inspire composition. You could read a poem and you could think, wow, that would work really well if it had a melody, maybe some beats, maybe an orchestral aspect to it. You can do so much with poetry if you also apply it with music. Who all here has seen Hamilton? So, as many of you may remember then, there is one particular song with Washington where they almost sing his farewell address, almost turning it into a poem through the song. It starts off very formal, where Hamilton, played by Lin-Manuel Miranda, is just speaking it, also in rhythm. But then Washington comes in and slowly starts singing notes. He starts really putting all of his all into it. The music sort of kicks up. It starts getting louder and louder, and at the very end of it, it's a song. They have turned Washington's farewell address into a song through poetry. If you look at the lyrics of the song, they're still structured in a way that a poem would be structured in. And poetry doesn't need to rhyme. It doesn't need to have all of these very specific details that some people may think they would, because this is a poem. Next slide. Now, back to the national anthem. I'm sure most people know about the general story of the national anthem. You know, it was written, as he said, and then it was turned into a song. But how many of you knew that it was actually written originally to a song? Not very many. See, originally it was written to the melody of a British drinking song, of all things. And this is all according to the Kennedy Center, a very reliable source. But it was written to a song already established, and whenever the author of the anthem gave it to one of his friends, he realized, I recognize this. I recognize that this could go to the song listed here. And whenever they started publishing the song, getting the word spread around, those two things became unanimous with each other. Till eventually, as we know today, that is the national anthem. This song that was originally used to inspire the anthem in some way has now become the anthem. Once again, all through poetry.
All right, so as my colleagues have already discussed, poetry it's a way that humanity has put words together in a rhythmic sense that invokes emotion. It's beautiful. There's many ways to interpret poetry, and as we've seen, the scope of poetry is pushed forward when we apply music to it. And so because of that, think about music. A lot of us listen to music, right? Maybe on the daily. But what's the intention of music? The original intention of music? Performance. Performance is the intention of music. Go ahead. If we look back to the Middle Ages, according to A History of Western Music by Buckholder, musicians got together and played lutes and all kinds of old medieval horns, and they did it for the purpose of fellowship and communion with each other. They would sing. There's a brand of French performers called troubadours, and what they would do is they would write these songs about like love and loss and just really emotional stuff, and they would stand in the courts of where they were hired, and they would sing to people. They would sing to the people like maybe a love interest, or they would sing for the king or queen as they walked by, or they would just sing for the common people. But the purpose was to provide an entertainment and a fellowship for everyone. So we see there's a percussionist by the name of Roy Ayers, and he says, the true beauty of music is that it connects people. So tying this into the national anthem. Back in 1991, the Super Bowl took place, and at that point, in that year, the Persian Gulf War was going on. And so anytime we see in American history where there's some kind of conflict overseas or in our own country, it's a cause for us to stand together and be unified. Well, at this game, Whitney Houston, who was considered and still is considered one of the most powerful and emotive singers, was invited to come sing at this game. And her performance of the national anthem is considered one of the most pivotal. During this time of distress overseas, everyone, and you could, if you watch the video, the YouTube video of this performance, you could see the crowd standing next to each other, like there's nothing wrong with the world, like everything is okay, because they are all unified by this performance, which was portrayed in such a beautiful and powerful manner by such a beautiful and powerful singer. And because of this, it ignited a sense of unity and a shared freedom.
Poetry is that it's universal, that it impacts people's thoughts, their emotions, their feelings, and there's so many different ways you can interpret it together.
See, even through music, the impact cannot be understated. Everyone is listening to poetry on a daily basis, all the time, and it is uniting people in ways that we could never think imaginable.
If you remember, we started this off by saying that poetry is very universal, right? There's no really true rhyme or reason to it, right? You can come up with your own rhyme or reason, but as we see through poetry, the impact has been so specific, like these performances that we talked about, like Whitney Houston's, for example. It's been so specific to talk to us as people and to elicit some emotional response that even though it starts as a universal idea, it can talk to people in very specific ways. That's about it.